I apologize for this rant, but I think we must send a petition to science fiction filmmakers to ask them to stop writing stories that are totally misleading for the uninformed audience. While the spaceship is orbiting around the planet, the script usually contains the following statement from the astronauts. Our scanners indicate that this is a lifeless lump of rocks. They show the planet, and it's a brown, waterless sphere. Our astronauts are teleported to the planet, a rocky desert that shows no signs of life. They just wear their uniforms to indicate the temperature is mild, and they walk on the planet breathing in the local atmosphere. This is absolutely impossible and is totally anti-scientific. On that type of planet, the air would simply be a toxic mix. The atmosphere we breathe, made up of 78% of nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 0.04% carbon dioxide, is a result of the activity of living organisms, and it took an awful lot of time to produce it. What is so special about the Earth? It is the third planet orbiting a yellow star, which we call the Sun, in a system made of inner rocky planets and outer gas giant planets. Astronomers talk about the Goldilocks, or habitable zone, a zone neither too near, not too far away from a star, so that planets in that zone are neither too hot nor too cold. The Earth is in the middle of this zone, with Venus on the hot side and Mars on the cold side. The gravity on Earth is strong enough to prevent its atmosphere to be stripped off by solar winds and photons, as it happened with Mercury and Mars and the Moon. The Earth rotates once every 24 hours, so that the difference between the highest temperature in the afternoon and the lowest at night is within a few degrees centigrade. It has a molten iron core that creates a magnetic field which protects it from cosmic rays, and has a surface temperature that allows water to be in liquid form. The early Earth was very different from what it is now. Imagine a planet bombarded by huge meteorites, with the huge moon very near to the surface, causing tides hundreds of meters high. Earth's rocky crust, the lithosphere, is broken by cracks from which magma flows, pushing the plates apart and on top of each other, so that some of the crust is always above the sea level, making up for the constant erosion of the emerged land due to rains and winds, while other plates sink, making the continents move around the surface of the Earth. Early Earth's atmosphere was a toxic mix of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, and its current composition is the result of a chain of chemical reactions which started more than 4 billion years ago. The first anaerobic organisms digested compounds based on sulfide and released hydrogen and oxygen into the atmosphere. Hydrogen atoms are very light and reach the top layers of the atmosphere, where they are kicked off into deep space by solar radiation. Oxygen is a heavier gas and remained in the atmosphere and in the water, where it reacted with the iron which was dissolved in the oceans when the Earth formed, transforming it into oxides which dropped to the seabed. Iron oxide is what gives red coloring to rocks, and we find it in huge deposits in places like Australia. It took 750 million years for all the iron in the oceans to be turned into rust. When all the free iron had disappeared from the water, the oxygen in it started to increase, allowing the development of aerobic-like forms containing chloroplasts, which use oxygen for their metabolism and bringing about the mass extinction of the anaerobic life forms. Chloroplasts release oxygen, and over the billions of years, this allowed life to develop in the oceans and has resulted in the current breathable Earth atmosphere. Oxygen also rises to the outer layers of the atmosphere, where cosmic rays turn it into ozone, which blocks ultraviolet radiation that would otherwise kill any living being outside the water. Let's examine the principles of evolution. There is often a misunderstanding of the Darwinian intuition of the survival of the fittest. Fit for what? What is the purpose of evolution? Why do we have such a wide variety of life forms? We live in a world of ecological niches. There is no generic fitness. Each species is fit for the ecological niche in which it lives and is interlinked with all the other species that live in the same environment in the food chain. There are millions of niches depending on temperature, chemical composition of the ground, dry or wet environment, and so on, so that the food chain is different, giving origin to an infinite variety of shapes and sizes of living beings. In a stable niche, life forms remain unchanged indefinitely. We see it, for instance, in sharks or turtles, which are basically the same since many millions of years ago. If the environment changes, plants evolve, and thus the animals. People often ask the key question: if humans are the result of the evolution of monkeys, why have not all monkeys become men? This is a misunderstanding of evolution, possibly due to the way evolutionists explain it. For example, by quoting the eye, from a sensor which can just detect light to a simple organ, to the fantastic eye of the eagle, which can see a rabbit miles away. People are led to believe that there is a drive to better and bigger organs, that evolution has a direction. This is misconception. For instance, chickens. They can see only a few meters away, but that does not mean that they are sort of failed eagles. Their eyes are extremely efficient, and they can see 4 colors instead of only 3 as humans. The eye of the eagle sees miles away because that is what is needed for hunting rabbits flying high above. Chickens have got to see in details bugs and worms that seeds a few meters away, and that is what their eyes are made for. Animals who live in dark caverns have no need for eyes, and evolution reduces their size and removes them as any other organ that is not needed. If we consider animal intelligence, we see how birds cut leaves and twigs to build their nests, and realize how incredibly intelligent they are for what they need. Some even build nest towns. Their brain is made exactly as needed for them to live in their environment, no more and no less. Evolution does not have any direction, any design, but neither it happens at random, by throwing dice. When the DNA mixes in order to form a new being, it does not know what conditions it will find during its life. It cannot foresee the future. Again, the misunderstanding is due largely by inadequate explanation by scientists and journalists who want to popularize new findings. Often when they talk about DNA, they say that during copy, mistakes are made which produce different versions of DNA. This is not a mistake. Diversification is the essence of survival and life in whatever condition may exist. Animals' variations are based on the Gaussian curve. The mass of the populations has median characteristics, with smaller percentages of differences at both extremes. Some are more suitable to whatever condition that there is. For example, fur. In the total number of all animals of each species, there is a small percentage of individuals with longer or shorter fur. If the temperature rises or falls drastically, only the animals with the most suitable length of fur will survive in the new conditions. The same will happen with things like length of legs, neck, shape of teeth, body size, and so on, in response to changes from dry to wet, changes in vegetation, etc. Nature does not make mistakes. If individuals survive, it means they are just right for those conditions, while nature will dispose of anyone not fit for the environment. Let's look at the evolution of life on Earth. More than 1 billion years after the Earth formation, living creatures evolved in the oceans called prokaryotes. They were basically a membrane, a bubble containing strands of DNA. DNA is formed by atoms of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus combined in long chains as single filaments, ribonucleic acid or RNA, and double spiral, deoxyribonucleic acid or DNA. The question we ask ourselves is this: how likely is it that on other planets, adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine have combined in the same sequence as Earth? Or is it possible that on other planets, different amino acid chains have combined? Our drive for the exploration of the planet is motivated by that. We want to know whether on some distant planet there is life that uses the same building block as an Earth or not. It took hundreds of millions of years for prokaryotes to evolve into more complex organisms called eukaryotes. Following that, it took hundreds of millions of years more for the evolution from single cell to multicellular beings. And then the infinite variety of plants and animals developed. However, it took 4 billion years for life to emerge from the oceans and conquer the continents. Why? When the Earth was born, it used to spin around its axis much faster than today. Larger planets rotate very quickly. For comparison, the day on Jupiter lasts 9 Earth hours, on Saturn 10. On Neptune it lasts 16 hours, and wind at 2,100 kilometers per hour have been detected on its surface. Mars is much smaller and rotates in about 25 Earth hours. In the beginning, Earth rotated on its axis in just a few hours. At that speed, extremely strong hurricanes would sweep continuously over the surface, moving enormous masses of earth and sand. We know this because we found fossilized dunes hundreds of meters high, not just a few feet as nowadays. This prevented plants from taking hold on the emerged land. But as it happens, the Earth is in a tidal lock with the Moon, a huge satellite which slows down Earth's rotation, progressively lengthening the duration of the day. So the Earth had all the right combinations of factors, the right size, in the right position, and at the right temperature, and had also a moon big enough to slow it down. Still, it took 4 billion years for the day to be lengthened to 20 hours, so that wind speed would slow down to a point that allowed plants to root on dry land. These are the durations of the day since complex form of life appeared. About 430 million years ago, when the day lasted 21, 22 hours, we see ferns and palm trees spreading across the continents, able to survive strong winds thanks to their flexibility. The new environment allowed for the first insects to evolve on dry land. Once again, the moon was decisive for the evolution of life. About 400 million years ago, when the moon was much closer, high tide was several meters deep. This trapped fish in tidal basins. Only those with fins suitable for locomotion could return to the ocean and survive, and then develop lungs and be able to remain on dry land where they could eat insects and plants. The first species to evolve on the continents included dinosaurs and birds covered with scales, fur, or feathers. The ancestors of crocodiles, originally a very agile terrestrial animal which subsequently adapted to a watery life, and the ancestors of mammalians. Since life began, we can clearly identify peaks of extinctions every 50 million years, which brought about the disappearance of millions of species, and from the few survivors, new species always evolved and repopulated the Earth. For many millions of years, reptiles were the dominant animals. Let me elaborate a while about reptiles. I often hear it said that they are primitive, cold-blooded animals. Their blood is not cold, it is at room temperature. If it is hot, they are warm. If it gets colder, their temperature drops and their metabolism slows down. This is very efficient, and the food they ingested in their enormous stomachs could be used to build up body size. At that time, the mammals were active mainly at night, needing a metabolic mechanism to keep them warm, so they had to eat continuously. Insects, their source of protein, were very abundant, but for a very long period of time, mammals remained very small. From the Cambrian to the Cretaceous period, days lengthened from 20 hours to 23 hours, and the difference in temperature between night and day increased, making life more and more difficult for the dinosaurs. Today, if it gets too hot, they hide under rocks or bushes. Not too easy at that time with their enormous size. They were already in decline when the asteroid hit the Earth 65 million years ago and could not recover as they had done in previous events of great extinction. The progressive change in the duration of the day caused by the moon is the main constant environmental pressure in the evolution of species, along with climatic changes. In the beginning, winds were fast and powerful, plants had to be flexible to survive, and the strong winds dispersed pollen and seeds. When wind got progressively slower, to survive the new conditions, plants had to evolve a new mechanism for fertilization based on animals that transport pollen from plant to plant attracted by flowers. Also, the dispersion of seeds had to be done by animals. We see that some mammals changed the shape of their teeth, adapting their diet from insect eaters to fruit eaters. This way, animals had at their disposal a food of rich nutritional value, for which a small stomach was needed and could supply high amounts of sugars and oxygen to large brains. Our brain consumes about 25% of the body oxygen. But many of the fruits were on top of tall hardwood trees. Therefore, primitive mammals began climbing and adapted their bodies to tree life, with a premium on agility and mobility, evolving into monkeys in Africa. Some of them adapted to walking on two legs on the branches, losing their tail. Then the eastern African tropical forest turned into a desert dotted with bushes full of berries. This forced one of the many subspecies of the ancestors of chimpanzees to become a terrestrial animal, adapting their hands to grabbing things rather than using them for locomotion on top of the trees. But for several million years, there were basically only apes with long legs. Different animals have different level of vocalization, from the simplest cries and chirps to the most complex warbling of singing birds to whale singing. The production of sound is controlled by one of the many varieties of the FOXP2 gene. The sound box or larynx of the chimpanzees is in a position that allows them to produce only a limited number of grunts, but to eat while hanging upside down from a branch. This was no longer necessary when they began to walk on the ground, and during millions of years the larynx changed its position in the throat. This allowed them to take full advantage of a mutation in their FOXP2 gene, which enabled them to articulate words and, as a side effect, organize better thought processes. There was a snowball effect. Better speaking people could better discuss hunting strategies, war plans, and get stronger interpersonal relationships. The smarter ones could have more descendants. In the course of a few million years, the brain grew from 250 cubic centimeters to 1,400 cubic centimeters. Humans at last. But for at least 200,000 years, modern man has walked on the earth, hunting and gathering, just a little more effectively than his ancestors. Only in recent times humans have begun to substantially change their environment, and a technological civilization began on Earth only in the last 500 years. We spoke about the moon and its essential role in the life evolution, but the moon will also be the cause of the end of life on Earth. As the moon's braking action on Earth's rotation continues, the day has grown longer and longer, from 20 hours to 24 hours nowadays, and the difference in temperature between night and day is getting bigger and bigger. The environment is getting more and more difficult to live in. Mammals have adapted to the difference in temperature between day and night, and whereas their body temperature was initially about 30 degrees centigrade, has gone up. For example, in man, it's 37 degrees. Camels, who live in places where the day temperature in summer reaches 50 degrees centigrade, have a body temperature of 40 degrees. In summer, running in the afternoon would cause a fatal overheating. Herbivores graze and carnivores hunt mostly at night. But in the future, the day will last 25, 26, 27 hours and beyond. Possibly no more than 200 million years from now, the temperature during the day will reach 100 degrees centigrade and beyond, boiling the surface water and burning vegetation, while at night it will fall below freezing. The conditions on Earth will again be unsuitable for the survival of complex life forms, and this much before the sun swells up and swallows the Earth. On the other hand, a planet without the moon will have a completely different evolution compared to Earth. If it has the right size and is located in the habitable zone, it would have an ocean covering the whole surface. But it will forever spin at high speed, and there will be no continent formation. On the Earth, at the bottom of the oceans, hydrothermal volcanic springs emit acidic water at a temperature of several hundred degrees centigrade. And there is an ecological niche that has developed with bacteria which feed on chemicals dissolved in the hot water and feed worms and fish. Something similar could happen on any planet. A rich marine life would develop, causing the release of hydrogen and oxygen into the atmosphere. Hydrogen would slowly disperse into space, as it does on Earth. This would continue for billions of years, leading to the removal of all hydrogen and the disappearance of the oceans, when the entire planet would be reduced to a rusty dry ball. We are looking for a planet with conditions equal to those on the Earth, hoping that we will find a species intelligent enough to develop a highly technological civilization. Creationists suffer from a misunderstanding of the laws of evolution when they reject it by saying it is not possible that there is evolution, because in that case all monkeys would have evolved into man. But those who suggest that hundreds of planets in the universe have the right combination of conditions, therefore, on then, one species will evolve to develop a big brain, suffer from the same misunderstanding in reverse. There could be hundreds of planets with millions of species of animals none of them anywhere near as intelligent as humans. There is no selective pressure towards more intelligence. When I detail the evolution of mammals into man, it is a misunderstanding to think that it was a sort of unavoidable path. On another planet with the moon, the rotation would slow down, plants would colonize the continents, animals would follow them, there will be species like flowers and fruits, but this does not necessarily mean that animals similar to monkeys will evolve. All kinds of animals live on trees. Squirrels, iguanas, bats, birds, pandas, koalas, sloths. Prosimians evolved into monkeys as their diet became more reliant on fruits rather than insects, but that happened only in Africa. They did not evolve in Australia, they did not even develop in South America, and they arrived there from Africa after many million years as an evolved species. Apes evolved from monkeys in Africa, but they did not evolve in South America. On Earth, we had environmental conditions which led to the evolution of a species with a warm body, which is essential to allow the brain to work constantly and efficiently, with hands free for manipulation instead of locomotion, with a communication system sophisticated enough to be able to exchange complex information, who are sociable and cooperative enough to be able to take collective advantage of innovation proposed by individuals, so that their brain grew to a very large size and eventually developed in an advanced civilization. It took 300 million years for that to happen, in one species only amongst the many millions which appeared and disappeared, with similar conditions on another planet produced similar results. This is a table of the exoplanets found so far. As we can see, in the habitable zone, out of some about more than 3,700 Terran planets, only 21 are the same size as the Earth. Most planets are much larger than Earth, and they are also in the wrong place. A large planet in that zone prevents the presence of a planet of terrestrial dimensions, thus greatly reducing the percentage of solar systems with a habitable Earth. The Sun is a third